All right. Welcome, everyone. This is the start of our virtual author fair. So we try to do the author fair as an annual event, but last year some other things got in the way. We are back this year. We are virtual, so you can attend from home. We are using the webinar format today, which means you can see and hear us, but we cannot see or hear you. So sit back and relax. If you do have any questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can click the little Q&A button. It looks like 2 speech bubbles. If you don't see that, you're going to click the More button on your little toolbar there. It looks like 3 dots. It all depends on your device and the size of your screen, how your toolbar appears. We have a couple of different authors with us today. We're going to be talking about dealing with difficult topics in our writing. So I'm going to introduce our first author. Each author will present, and then we'll go through a Q&A panel at the end, but you can submit your questions throughout the entire presentation. All right, so please join me in welcoming Jan LeDonne Alexander. Jan is Jan PhD, founder of the Backyard Caucus, Inc. This group is a grassroots organization founded to start conversation about race in Elmhurst. She has spent her career in special education and in college access for all students, both in the city of Chicago and the suburbs. She has raised her mixed race family in Elmhurst and hopes to make it the type of community where they will want to raise their own children. Welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here to talk about our work of love. Our group was founded last June, was our first meeting, and this was in response to the murder of George Floyd. I knew I had to do something, being a mother of 4 Black children. I thought it was time to start the conversation in our town. Our thoughts were that Elmhurst is a wonderful community to raise our families. There may be a lot of ignorance regarding racial discord and diversity, but there wasn't a lot of hate. So I thought the answer here is education. We've got a group of people together, local people, and our group is 70 people strong right now. And one of the first projects we started, as we started meeting, we talked about our stories and our experiences. And one of our members came up and said, let's do a book. And thus we started the Stories of Race in Elmhurst. It took a lot of thought and certainly a lot of courage. So I'm representing a lot of storytellers and a lot of authors. Although I am the founder of the group, and have a story in the book. Many of the authors, 25 in total, wrote separate stories. And although could not be here today, welcome your interest in our book. I think you're going to find our book very enlightening. For many people in town, reading these stories, we are a predominantly white community. You're going to be surprised. For people of color, they're going to say, yeah, this is what I expected to read. But one of the things that I think is really key about our book is that the stories all end with a sign of hope. These are people who have opted to stay in Elmhurst. And one particular story that you'll read about, I still to this day ask them, why would you still come here? A Black family who wasn't allowed to buy a home, both Northwestern graduates, and could not, the owner would not sell to them. But they kept looking and found another home in town and stayed and raised their kids, and they're still here. So those are the stories that we hope people to learn from and realize that some of the ignorance still goes on, some of the discrimination, whether overt or covert, is still out there. And we have stories in this book that are from white people who didn't understand and talked about their lack of understanding. who never were around people of color in the past and have been enlightened by some of the things they've learned and have been willing to stick with the cause. In fact, we had one 70-something-year-old gentleman who was white gentleman in our group who came to a couple meetings. His wife prompted him to come, and he said, I really don't know that I have anything to contribute. He said, I'm not going to continue to come. Sent me an email, and I said, that's fine, Dick. I really appreciate your efforts. 2 weeks later, he had continued to see some of our notes and decided to come back. And ultimately, Dick wrote a story about his experience with people of color in our book. So those are the people we really want to get to, are the people who don't realize they have something to offer in terms of diversity and race. On a personal note, I was involved in the Elmhurst Lions Club back in the day, one of the first women in the club. And I became engaged to a Black man, and this was a pretty conservative, all white men's group, right? But they all were very supportive. And not only that, but they kept coming up to me and saying, you know, I have a friend or my niece or my nephew, all of whom had married people of another background, a racial background, and shared some of their experiences. But they were able to talk and they were able to ask candid questions. And those are the conversations I think that we need to have more of. People who are okay and know that we might say the wrong thing. Sometimes I worry I might say the wrong thing. My kids had a very different experience than me. You know, I was white, although I married a Black man. I did not walk in their shoes. Neither did their dad. So our goal is to hope that these stories will get people talking, get people discussing race in our community, and hopefully it will spread to other communities and make our town a more inclusive place to live. I'm going to close with a quote from one of our young people who submitted a story, a young Black man who was raised in Elmhurst, went through Elmhurst schools, and he shared his experiences. I think you'll enjoy reading them. But he said, lumping us all together as if we all think and act alike leads to huge misunderstandings. What we need now is more understanding, more appreciation of nuance, and a clear realization of diversity's value. We don't have to fear or let it make us angry. We need to embrace it. So on that note, I will appreciate any questions at the end of our sessions today. And I look forward to hearing more. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So our next author is Julie M Genteel. She is the most enthusiastic self-care advocate for busy people you will ever meet. As a yoga teacher, author of 2 award-winning books, 108 Yoga and Self-Care Practices for Busy Mamas, and How to Stay Calm in Chaos, an Everyday Self-Care Guide, and creator of the Stand Up for Your Self-Care blog and YouTube channel, she illuminates the power of self-care by helping busy people create better self-care habits. As a full-time working mom raising young kids in a pandemic, she has had to deal with her share of difficult topics. Julie's monthly e-newsletter, Nourish Note, is sprinkled with her favorite self-care tips, and you can register for it on her website, which I will put in the chat. You can also access it from the author fair page, and you can connect with her on Instagram and Facebook. Put that in the chat as well. Welcome, Julie.
Hello, and how are you, everyone? I'm so glad to be here with you. I'm excited to share information about dealing with difficult topics, finding time for self-care. So I often talk a lot about, how do we find time for ourselves as busy people in this modern world, especially in this modern day pandemic. And so we'll go through a few things today on really what inspired me to write books about self-care and specifically for busy people. So I am the author of 2 award-winning books, 108 Yoga and Self-Care Practices for Busy Mamas. And then my newest, which was written and published in the pandemic, How to Stay Calm in Chaos, an Everyday Self-Care Guide. I've been a yoga teacher since 2011, and I'm the creator of a YouTube channel called Stand Up for Your Self-Care, a blog with the same name, and the monthly newsletter that I publish called Nourish Note. I'm a full-time working mom and a self-care speaker, and my work has been published in articles in multiple websites and magazines, from Chicago Parent to Natural Awakening Chicago, Mantra Wellness, and more. And so when I ask this question, why is it so hard to find time for ourselves? I get a variety of answers, but oftentimes they're really connected. So for example, competing priorities, too many commitments, distractions, excuses, procrastination, and the list goes on, not enough time. It's hard to find time for myself because of time management or demanding work schedules, doing everything for everyone else, putting other needs first, and feeling guilty taking time for myself. So there's some statistics I'd like to share with you. And we know, right? We know the things that we want to be doing. We know we want to be eating more vegetables. We know we want to be getting more sleep. But the statistics here that I'm sharing today, the first one here is only 1 in 4 adults in the US get the recommended amount of physical activity. And then only 1 in 10 adults in the US gets enough fruits and vegetables. 1 in 3 adults in the US are not getting enough sleep. So when you look at the recommendations from what the statistics look like to what the recommendations are really saying, the American Heart Association is advocating for us to get 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity aerobic activity weekly. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommend 2 to 3 cups of vegetables, 1.5 to 2 cups of fruits every day. And the American Academy of Sleep Medicine and Sleep Research Society advocate for us to get more than 7 hours of sleep a night. Now, just understanding from a busy person's perspective who's listening to this, there's a lot going on in your life. And it's, the question comes up, well, how do I do all these things, especially with those things that we just listed, competing priorities, not enough time management, et cetera. How do you fit all of these things in? Well, I'm here to say that you can. And I want to help make a difference in these statistics, which is why I'm here today, which is why I teach yoga, which is why I wrote self-care books. So pop quiz time. What is self-care? A, brushing your teeth, taking a shower. B, anything you do to nurture and nourish your whole self, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and beyond. And C, a lifelong practice. Or D, all of the above. So if you chose D, you're right. Self-care is all of this and more. It's not just one of these things. It's an umbrella of practices really that you do to keep yourself really mind, body, spirit well, with physical, emotional, spiritual wellness and beyond. And so oftentimes when I talk about self-care, I'll talk about a self-care bucket. And there's a quote from Buddha that says, "A jug fills drop by drop." And so when I talk about this self-care bucket, really visualizing every time you practice self-care, so whether that's a walk outside in the morning, whether that's sipping tea at night, taking a minute for yourself, whether it's, meditating for 5 minutes in the morning, you add these little imaginary drops of self-care into your bucket. And so eventually these drops start to add up in the bucket, and then the bucket starts to overflow. And that's when you've filled up enough for yourself so that you can be there for the others in your life, right? And so what you're here to do on this earth, in this life. And so the other thing about self-care is that if you don't know where to start small. So it can be just one small thing. It could be 1 minute every day, a 1-minute meditation, 1 minute to journal every single night. I mean, these don't have to be hours and hours long activities. They can be, certainly. But my thing is, when you're super busy and you're trying to pack everything in to a really demanding day, we have to be practical with ourselves. We have to start small. And so when we take care of ourselves, it really, truly shows in how we're treating ourselves and how we treat others. And so just some self-care ideas that I often share with folks is that you don't need to do it all. Do what you can. Again, start small, but getting the sleep you need. And that's going to look a little bit different for everybody because we're all different, right? We all have different sleep schedules. We all have different things we like to do, getting ready for bed, but get the sleep you need. Make sure that you're ready to go for the next day and that you're restored, you're rested, you're rejuvenated. Another thing you can do is breath work. In yoga, we call it pranayama. And so even just deep breathing or counting to 4 on each inhale and counting to 4 on each exhale. Okay, so there's a variety of breathwork practices that you can do, but just know that you can keep it simple and focusing on one breath a day, right? The inhale and the exhale. That can be a self-care practice, just to notice one full breath a day. Movement is another self-care idea, right? We talked about the walks around, the block. If you can get outside in nature, you see some trees, some water, the sky, that's really going to help connect your inner nature to Mother Nature. And so meditation is also something I regularly practice every single day before I even open my bedroom door, because it helps ground me and gets me ready for the day ahead, whatever the day may bring. Journaling is something I'm a huge advocate for. I journal every single night. At one point, I had 4 journals. I have 2 right now, 2 journals, but I love to write, and journaling is another style of writing that really helps. It's a practice that really helps me organize my thoughts, collect just my dreams, my hopes, my goals, etc. And it's something that I can practice in a busy lifestyle. Eating more fruits and vegetables, like we talked about, the time in nature every day. And if you're not able to walk outside every day, maybe you're going outside to just take a couple breaths on your front step outside, watching the moon or looking at the stars in the sky and noticing them. Spending time with family and friends, those personal relationships, so important for self-care, just connecting to others, right? Beyond connecting to ourselves, connecting to others. And then asking for help is a huge self-care practice, because we think we can do it all, right? And maybe we can, but we don't have to, right? We can reach out to a family member, a friend, somebody else to help us with even the smallest things. And when you do that, you'll notice right away a shift in just that feeling of, okay, connection, but also you're not alone. You're not alone in this. So I'd like to just practice here for a minute, a meditation. And this is more of a mantra meditation where you're syncing words to your breath. So I want you to close your eyes. Go ahead and get comfortable here. Close your eyes, spine is tall and long. Roll your shoulders up, back and down. And just watch your breath go in and out. Every time you inhale, maybe notice a coolness of your breath in. And then every time you exhale, maybe notice warmth come out through the nose. And so next time you inhale, think of the words I am. And when you exhale, think of the words here now. I am here now. Keep going just for a few more breaths. Every time you inhale, think of the words I am. And exhale, think of the words here now. I am here now. One more breath. And then just start to let the mantra go, let it fade. Coming back to your natural breath. Notice your breath in the present moment. Most of our thoughts are in the past or the future. Just staying here connected, and gently open your eyes. So self-care can be that simple. Self-care can be as simple as connecting with your breath, coming back to your mantra. And I know that we all have 1 minute to practice that, even in a very, very busy schedule. So another mantra I'd like to leave you with is I am worthy. Of the 10 minutes in nature, the 30-minute workout, the day of self-care, the weekend of rest, however long it takes to take care of you, you are worthy for however long it takes to take your time with self-care here. So I mentioned my books already. You can find those on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, the MSI Press website, other online retailers. And then I also teach in-person and virtual evening classes at the Bloomingdale Park District. I teach classes at times when busy people can attend them. And so I teach a yoga flow and meditation class on Monday evenings at 7 p.m. and a yoga for self-care class at 7 p.m. on Wednesdays. Again, you can sign up for my monthly newsletter on my website, juliegtheyogi.com. And I truly thank you for your time today. The light in me honors and sees the light in you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And as a reminder, we do have links to all of the books and authors on that main author fair page where you got the link to join here. So our next author is Gary Midkiff. Gary's profession focuses on politics and foreign policy, leading and stimulating discussion groups and writing, including his international newsletter, The View from My Balcony, and teaching American history. Gary's 2018 TEDx talk, Consuming News, looks at how different points of view help clarify facts. His background includes corporate management, international strategy, consulting, and for a few years, managing school bus facilities. Gary is a hobby chef and graduated from culinary school in France. Gary and his wife, Carol, live in Buffalo Grove, Illinois. Busville is his first novel, and he is currently working on his second novel, The Final Recipe. Welcome. You're muted, Gary.
There we go.
Yeah,
I'd like to
perfect.
begin with a couple of quick comments for the first two authors who spoke. Jan, I absolutely agree with your comment as I interpret it in terms of moving towards difficult topics. Discussing foreign policy, which is what I do a lot, there are a lot of difficult topics and we have to move toward them if we have any chance of understanding them. And for Julie, I'd like to mention that as a 40-year student of Zen, I understand a lot of what you are talking about and practice the meditation that you've talked about. And for people who might want a general introduction to that, separate of course from your books, which we all should buy, I would suggest that the book Way of the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Millman might be something that you could enjoy if that topic is intriguing to you. I want to talk about my writing history and a couple of comments about writing. I began by writing poetry, and my studies of authors who write fiction indicate that many of us began by writing poetry. It's rather short form. It doesn't require a lot of design. So I did that. I published it for friends. I was encouraged by what they had written. So then I moved to short stories from poetry, none of which were published, maybe 20 pages in length. Character studies, I found that very intriguing to do that. So then I took a big jump and I moved to mid-range stories, about 60 pages. Some of them were historically oriented. And then I came across an idea for my premier short story called Intersection. It's about an intersection in the northwest suburbs and 5 different vehicles driven by 5 different people with 5 different stories have a massive accident at that intersection. So the story is, how did they get there? And then what happens to them after it is over? People who have read that encouraged me to write something longer, and that became the genesis for the idea about the novel Busville. I managed a school bus facility for a couple of years. I've started a couple of companies in my life, and between closing one and starting the next, I managed a school bus facility for a few years and was fascinated both by the process and by the stories of school bus drivers. And most people do not understand what school bus drivers go through. So I said, I should really write about school bus drivers. And that led to the novel Busville. And in writing about school bus drivers, my initial organizing theme was this, taking the idea from Intersection. I said, I want to write about a train school bus accident. That's where I want the novel to go. Now, that's a pretty gruesome topic. So I had to then in my organization backtrack in terms of who are the characters, how do they get there, how do I make you care about them, and then what happens when the accident occurs. But in writing about the accident itself, and I'm going to read you 2 pages from my book that describe the accident, I was strongly affected by a comment from Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock once said that the ultimate murder scene in a movie is simply seeing one drop of red blood on a white flower. That's it. No gore, nothing grotesque. You know what's happening. So in the mind of the reader or the viewer, in the case of Hitchcock, you can make that as intense as you want. And so I'm going to read the description of the accident. You all know the character names, but that's okay. And the accident itself. And then what I do in the book is the next couple of chapters introduce you one at a time to what happened to the characters. There isn't anything necessarily gruesome in that. So 2 pages from Busville. This is the train bus accident. Red lights at the Coolidge Railroad crossing began flashing and warning bells began ringing. Connie escorted the first student to the emergency door. Rick took her, handed her to Stephanie, and then looked to his left. He could see a freight train approaching from the south. Get her away from the bus. Go in that direction. Jules got the next student to the door. Rick handed her to Adam as the freight train continued to approach. Get her away from the bus. Stephanie ran back to the bus. Steph, help pull people out. Rick ran to the jammed service door and grabbed the outside handle with both hands, braced his feet against the side of the bus and pulled with all of his strength. The door exploded from its hinges. Connie, the door's open. Give me a student. Reverend Bobby arrived, breathing heavily with a pain in his chest. Rick, what can I do? Crossing gates are coming down. 20 seconds. Rick could hear the train engineer beeping his horn and activating brakes. Reverend, go to the back door, catch children and get them away from the bus. Marcus, when Connie hands you a student, go in that direction away from the bus. We should be able to get more students out. An aide rolled out the emergency door, reached back and grabbed her student and began running. Connie appeared in the service door holding a student. Marcus took the student and reached for Connie. Connie, please, I've got to go back in. No, he said. You have to come with me and I'll go back. I'm faster. Rick ran around to the back of the bus. An aide tumbled out and Jules was right behind her. Jules yelled, Rick, there's a student stuck in her seatbelt. Rick jumped through the emergency door. Steph, come here. Adam, get ready to catch his student. 10 seconds. The belt was tangled. Marcus ran back to the service door, pulled another student out, grabbed the hand of an aide and dragged them away. Rick saw the seatbelt had formed a loop and wrapped around the student's leg. He pulled on both sides of the loop. Steph, pull her out. Stephanie lifted, pivoted, and handed her to Adam. Run like hell, 5 seconds. Stephanie started to climb out the emergency door with Rick right behind her. The freight train hit the left rear corner of the disabled school bus. The impact lifted the school bus into the air and spun it around like a frisbee. Pieces of metal and glass flew in every direction. The school bus hit the ground 20 feet northwest of the impact point and exploded. It took 29 seconds for the train to stop. In researching that scene, I watched 2 hours worth of train bus accidents on YouTube so that I could fully understand what happens when something that big hits something that small. But you'll notice, though there's tension in the story, there isn't anything that I would consider grotesque. Intense and dramatic, yes. Grotesque, no. And then the subsequent chapters, you learn what happened to the students who went through that. The accident is one of 2 difficult types of scenes I wrote about in Busville. The other have to do with sex scenes, which my wife was most amused about when I was writing those. But the purpose of those was to explain motivation for some people. We have one school bus driver who has run out of money. She desperately needs cash flow. She makes a decision which might be unsavory, but which is necessary for her in the short term. You describe motivation, you describe result. You let the reader fill in the details in the middle, and it doesn't detract from the drama whatever, because I had no interest in writing pornography, but I wanted to put those elements into the story. Final comment for those of you watching who might want to write yourself. Actually, 2 comments. The first is just start writing. The process, the practice, just write. Once you write it, don't write it in your head. Write it, on paper, on your computer, or whatever, but write it. That's the important part. And secondly, determine the best part of the day to write. For me, it is early in the morning before 10 a.m. My mind is the sharpest. I'm the most energetic. And yes, Julie, I always get at least 7.5 hours of sleep. Thanks for asking. But in the morning is when I am most energetic and my mind is the clearest. So for me, and now I've met other writers who write better at other points in the day, That requires some discipline. That's when I've got to write, because that's when I do best. Give yourself that sort of thought process, and I suspect that you can do well also. Thanks for listening, and I'll look forward to listening to Therese.
Okay, thank you. So we do have one more author today. So Therese Guldan was born and raised on the southwest side of Chicago. Therese, also known as Terry, has lived in Elmhurst for almost 30 years. She raised 2 children here and is now a grandmother. She was an avid reader and writer as a child, creating and directing plays in her Beverly basement, leading her mother to prophesize she would write their family story, and so she did. It took 13 years to write and publish The Letter, A Family's Tale Unplugged. It was published in 2016 and is available at Elmhurst Library and on Amazon. She has written many stories and is working on publishing her second. Welcome.
Thanks, Jez, for that introduction, and thanks Elmhurst Library for giving me this opportunity. This is the first time I've ever been on a Zoom author panel. It's pretty cool. I've had many Zoom experiences, but this one will probably be a little more enjoyable than regular old work. And thanks for the audience participating, spending time, and the other authors to participate and energize. It makes it more fun when we're all cooperating together. It's a Saturday, and I appreciate everyone taking their time out of a busy weekend. So it's a difficult topic section, and my book, The Letter, A Family's Tale of War, the topic is about loss, A Family's Tale Unplugged. Actually, it was going to be war in there, but I wanted to leave the word war out of the title because I wanted it to be a timeless book. It was about my family going through the loss of my brother, who was a U.S. Marine during the Vietnam War. There was a lot involved with that time period. I'm one of 13. I'm the 10th of 13. There was a lot going on within my family. But when this happened, none of us talked about it. It was, from a 10-year-old perspective, very confusing. Why would my parents, why would anyone let my brother go off into a place where he could be killed? My sisters and brothers, we span about an 18-year age span. So in the process of going through this book, which I refer to as where Cheaper by the Dozen meets Johnny Got His Gun. And for anyone younger than me, they probably never heard of either of those stories. But what I do is I parallel all of the memories, my sisters and brothers, aunts and uncles, close people of my brother at the time. I parallel that with my memories of an 11-year-old. So it's written from an 11-year-old's perspective that allows me more freedom of honesty, and it puts a little bit of humor in there too, because the perspective of a young person and how things are interpreted. I spent 13 years working on this book, and initially I wanted to learn about war and let other people know that this is what it does. This is what it did to our family. None of us talked about it when my parents had both passed away. My sister and I, when all of my siblings were going through my parents' belongings, we found a letter that my dad had written to my brother back then. And once we opened it, that's when that story my mom had mentioned began in my heart. It was just, I had a son who was my brother's age, about 18, and a war was going on that rose up after 9/11. And I was worried about him going off to war. I couldn't stand the thought. And so I wanted to learn what happened back then because I had very little memories. So in the process of interviewing my brothers and sisters, I learned how much pain there was because we hadn't talked about it. They shared openly and honestly, and they allowed me to use their interviews I had within my book to tell a whole story. Because I believe you can't tell a complete story, the complete truth, unless you have you have the insight of looking back. So these interviews I had and my family telling me what they remembered, using that to go back and tell the story from 1969 and 70, I felt helped tell the whole truth, which was what I needed. There was so much unknown. I didn't even want to talk about my brother. I didn't know him. I didn't know what he really did in Vietnam. But when my neighbors called him a baby killer, and I asked my mom, why would that be? And I got no answer. That just hung in me for years and years. And it wasn't until 2003 that we all started to talk about it. So what I discovered as I was finishing up this story, and because I liked stories so much, I wanted to tell it from a story perspective. I wanted people to want to read along and find out what happened. Although you can read the back cover and know that my brother did not make it home. So I thought that couldn't be the ending, or there's not going to be any surprise there. I need to wrap this up somehow. And so as I was approaching the end of the story, and Gary, you're right, you have to just start writing, because that's where, after years and years of research, I think it was 11 years, I almost was just gathering all this information. I thought, just start writing a story. And the mantra of write what you know kept running through my head. I wanted to write about war and what caused the Vietnam War. And even with all the research I did, I didn't have the skill to know about that. And I could tell my heart really wasn't into that. So I wrote what I knew. That's what geared me towards my 11-year-old perspective. I started from what I remembered, and then I took the gifts my brothers and sisters and his aunts and uncles had given me with their memories and my brother's letters, and I intertwined it all together to tell a chronological story. And it was just coincidentally, as I was nearing the end of that story, one of the platoon mates that my brother was with, the one who saw him last, right before a booby trap had taken him and his sergeant, he was there. And my sister connected with him on the virtual Vietnam War wall. He was able to give me that last excerpt to say what happened to my brother. And so everything seemed to fall together to tell this story. I didn't tell it on my own. I had the help of many. And at the end, when I was praying for, why am I writing this? What drove me after all of these years? I had a dream. I had a dream that which I did put in the book, but basically it told me it was about forgiveness. And I had to forgive my brother, and I had to understand, I had to forgive my parents for not feeling they weren't there helping and telling me. But that dream helped wrap it all up. And it ultimately the story was about forgiveness and my brothers and sisters and our healing. And writing and journaling, like Julie was saying, I mean, it all contributes. And I think all of this difficult topic, I see how it all intertwines. And Jan, we had a lot of integration issues going on in Beverly. That's brought up in the topic of my book, The Letter, A Family's Tale Unplugged. That's most of my brothers and sisters, not all of them. But I thank you for listening to my story, and I look forward to questions.
Right, thank you very much. So we're going to open up for questions now with a little bit of time. If you have a question for any of the authors or all of the authors, you can put it in the Q&A or the chat. We did have one question for Jan so far. Did conflicts arise among the people participating in the Backyard Caucus during your discussions, and how did the group handle those? You are muted.
Thanks. We we all had respect, obviously, for each other's stories, and we were a group that came together on a common ground. So there weren't quite as many conflicts as you might expect with discussions around race and equity. That being said, in one of the stories talked about the way African-American people are treated here in the States compared to the stereotypes in Europe. And she spoke of, and I'll be upfront, it was my daughter's story. And she spoke about how here Black people are seen as gangs and thugs, but there they were seen as gypsies from North Africa. And so we had days, actually more than days, of discussion about the use of the word gypsy, because that is something that the Roma culture is trying to get people away from using. I felt that it was used in a context of, she wasn't referring to people as that, but that's how Black people were seen. And I know it's a common term used in Italy and in Switzerland when I was there. All the pickpockets, they call them, they're all part of the gypsies. I never knew the full depth of what that meant. But ultimately, so our first print that went out has the word gypsy, but we updated and exchanged the word gypsy for nomad. So I wasn't exactly in agreement with the change because I thought it lost a little, but there were people that were uncomfortable with it. And so we made the change. So as I said, we don't always have to be all in agreement. It probably would have very little impact. Most people would have not even picked up on that gypsy could be seen as an offensive word because we have so little exposure in our community to that culture, and being sensitive to that. So that's an example of one of the conflicts that we had and spent quite a bit of time.
Thank you. Gary, you also, you work in politics and foreign policy, and you coordinate our Great Decisions program here as well as other places. So I'm sure you're very familiar with difficult conversations and people not being in agreement. How do you navigate those conversations with other people?
The important thing is to remind yourself that you are not going to be able to persuade anyone to change their mind. And if you think you're going to, it is going to be a wasted effort. The best you can do, and the phrase I use is seek common ground, which means find a place of understanding where you can say to the other person, you know what, I agree with you on that point. It's a tremendous tension diffuser. It makes the other person less anxious if they don't know you. Sometimes it takes a little bit to find that common ground, but you have to, and never, ever try to persuade anyone. At best, don't even try, because it's not going to work well. That's my answer to that. I'd like to make two comments to Terry, Jez, if I might. Okay.
Sure.
Terry, congratulations on your courage for writing that story. Oh my goodness. I mean, I wrote fiction. The characters do whatever I want to, but that is a story where you are bounded by the stories that you are told and you can't really change them. And it was emotional besides. So I admire your courage. Number two, the first poem I ever published was named Harold. That was the name of my high school friend who died in Vietnam in 1970. And every time we go to Washington, D.C., which we do because my daughter lives there. I print another copy of the poem and I go to the wall and I put it in the crack next to Harold's name or as close as I can get. And I know it's going to be taken down that night. I know that, but I just need to do it because I never want him to feel forgotten.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. It was definitely a difficult story. And I couldn't do it on my own. My brothers and sisters were very helpful. And just the part about the wall, there's a big part in my book about that, about not being able to go to it myself. And it took many years. And when I finally did go to the DC wall and see all of the memorabilia and the people, it just told me how important it was, and that my brother's life did mean something, and he still was there, and people were still honoring. But thank you.
I cry every time I go there, Terry, every time. I just know it's going to happen, and it brings back all those memories, and because Vietnam was the era when I served, and it just brings back all those memories.
Yeah, and how that block of marble or granite could do that was just amazing. And it's just so simple.
A quick comment to Jan, by the way, since she was talking about conflicts between cultures. When the award was given to the young architectural student who designed the wall, she is, as you know, Asian American, there was a lot of pushback from members of the military who said, wait a minute, that wasn't a white male architect. But the committee stood firm and it said, this is the best design. We don't care who did it. It's the best design. And anyone who has seen it is so unique among war memorials. And they made the right choice. But there was pushback at the time, which is an underbelly side of the story.
Yes, I appreciate that tidbit, Gary. The fact of it is she was an American.
Right. Asian American, American.
Yes.
Absolutely, yes.
We do have a question here for Terry. How did sharing your memories change or affect the relationships among your family members?
Oh, that's a great question, because I myself, in writing this story, was very worried about that. But it was amazing how all of them were just so gracious. I felt like we all came together. They were always asking me, how's your book going? How's the progress? And gosh, I've had probably 30, 40 book events where they've come to multiple ones, each one. It was truly a blessing that it really helped keep our relationships going strong. Thanks for that question.
And then Julie, so I put you in this session, not because self-care is difficult, although sometimes it can be, but because it's a way to respond to difficult topics and just general difficulties in our lives. I was curious if you had any thoughts on that. And also, I recently did a presentation for our self-care spa night. I did some research and I was wondering if you knew anything about the 8 dimensions of wellness.
Yeah, so I've heard of the 8 dimensions of wellness, but I can't speak directly to that. I can share that my self-care practices have moved me forward during this pandemic. And I think that's where that difficult topic kind of comes through, because no one ever anticipated a pandemic, right, in the modern day time, or at least many people didn't. And really the juggling of, all the responsibilities of a family, if you're working, etc. My self-care has moved me forward. And so, as we talked about the journaling, the sleeping, like that's easy to just do away with when you're in an urgent situation or a crisis. So really the self-care provides the groundedness that you need to move you forward in whatever life brings you. And so you're already preparing, for maybe sometimes difficult times by taking care of yourself now. And that's why the present moment is so important, because there's so many things we can do to take care of ourselves now in the present moment.
Great, thank you. So we are out of time, but thank you all for sharing your stories with us and for this great discussion. You can find all of their books and their websites, as well as the link to today's other sessions at elmlib.org/authorfair. Everything for today will go through that same link, so you don't have to worry about finding 12 different things in your email. Our next session at 11:30 is Books for Kids and Parents. So we have a variety of topics in there, from picture books to a field guide for new moms. So I hope you'll join us for the next session, as well as other things happening today. And again, you can find the Zoom link for that at elmlib.org/authorfair. All right, thank you all for your time today.
You're welcome.
Yes, you are welcome. Yes. Bye-bye, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Okay, bye now.
A pleasure. Thank you.